Okay, I think that's working now. All right, good, good. All right, so this case report, let's just talk about it a little bit. So this is at the very bottom of the hierarchy of evidence, right? A pretty good paper, but again, it's only like one person. So like we're going to talk about a couple of things with it. So hopefully, like you did actually read it. Like who it sounded like all of y'all were answering all these questions right, so that was pretty good. Pretty proud of y'all. So here is what it is. It was out 2012. So moderate intensity weight-bearing exercise program for a person with type 2 diabetes and peripheral neuropathy. So that was pretty good. What was the purpose of this study? Let's talk about this a little bit. What do we think? What's up, Mike?
To see how a patient with diabetes could, I didn't know he was 76 years old, so an older
Yeah,
age. So
yeah.
how his body would could handle a moderate exercise.
Right, right, definitely. So here, really, this was just out of the abstract. You only had to read the first couple lines of the abstract to understand the background purpose for this, like overall. So here, let's just go and read this. The exercise guidelines for people with diabetes, and peripheral neuropathy have recently been changed to allow moderate intensity weight-bearing exercise. So before, it was mostly low intensity and mostly like non-weight bearing. So things like swimming or doing whatever like that, or like cycling maybe, non-weight bearing stuff. But there are a few reports in the literature describing appropriate weight-bearing exercise for people with diabetes and peripheral neuropathy. This case report describes a successful and safe progressive exercise program for an individual, a very old individual like that. So that's really the whole purpose of it. And if we go into the introduction, here is kind of what's going on here. So the ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, that's the body that is essentially telling us how to exercise for people who are either healthy or with different diseases. American College of Sports Medicine, that's really like the big thing here. Or the American Diabetes Association also has numerous things with that. So to recommend exercise that are restricted to non-weight-bearing activities. So the exercise guidelines have recently changed. So from 2006, to allow individuals, so on and so forth, right? So overall, like pointing at where all of these different things are. So at the very end of essentially the introduction, it spells this out for us pretty well, and I think I captured it from different angles, so that's really why it ended up coming in like that. So the purpose of this case report is to describe the effects of moderate intensity 12-week progressive walking and resistance exercise program that reflects recently changed guidelines for exercise for people, that's not really written very well, with diabetes mellitus and like peripheral neuropathy on a physical performance. So a bunch of different types of performances were actually measured. So effectively, these are all the dependent variables right there. The reason that I'm pointing this out, whenever you're writing introductions, so like you will for your paper in class, you really want to spell out the purpose of your study essentially at the very end of the introduction. So just take note of that. And take note, like if you're ever reading an introduction, effectively how it is, it's like an upside down pyramid. It starts really broad and then it gets really narrow to your specific study in particular. Good with that? That makes sense to everybody? Okay, good. So information about the participant. Initially, I was pretty mad whenever I was reading this because it just said it was a 76-year-old male who had like fear of falling and all of that type of stuff, and it only gave us the body mass index, so 27.1. It didn't say weight or height. It said weight later on, so I actually had to infer that he's 5'8" because he started at 178 pounds, went down to like, what was it, 160, yeah, lost 13 pounds, so however that math works. History of heart attack, all of this type of stuff. Like hypertension, high blood sugar, both are controlled with oral medication. So just kind of letting us know like who this is, right? So first off, are most people with diabetes and peripheral neuropathy, are most of them males? What do you think? I mean, probably. Now, like this is a sweeping generalization. Most diseases like this, more males than females most of the time. There is a protective effect of estrogen in many cases. However, 76-year-old, like that's after menopause, so like could start having more problems there. BMI, so like not crazy overweight, 178 pounds at 5'8", right? That's not insane, right? Is everyone good with that? Okay, cool. History of heart attack. So he had, I think it said he had some type of bypass. I read it a little while ago, so I'm not sure. But going on, what did they do? So starting off, there were a bunch of different things. So they checked for peripheral neuropathy, a 6-minute walk test, which we're going to analyze that 6-minute walk test a little bit more. And then here, the FAM, I'm assuming that's how individuals in this would say it. So the foot and ankle mobility measure, that was actually like a self-report, so asking them how to do that. They measured some ankle torque things on there, which the Newton meters on like the dorsiflexion were so low that I couldn't really, I'm not even sure if they did that right. Because like you can kind of fall into 4 Newton meters, but that's just because I know about it. Here, intermuscular adipose tissue and lean muscle mass volumes, they said some cool stuff right here. Now, frequently whenever a study uses a particular device that is a little bit more busy or high tech, they should do what they did, some retest reliability, and they reported that data. So always be aware of that whenever you're like reading different things. Right, and here, what does it say? That like its volume is less than 1% and 2% off on these different things. So they have some good confidence that whatever values they're putting up for intermuscular adipose tissue and lean muscle volumes from the MRI, it's within 1 to 2% of what that's kind of what they're stating right there. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's to be trusted, more or less. This one right here, yeah, like I just highlighted that 3 times a week for 12 weeks, just in case we didn't go over that already. Hopefully everyone, it seems like everybody got it. Now here, this was essentially the exercise program, which they talked about the progression in there. Most of the time from week to week, there was approximately like a 10% progression. So kind of cool. Started off with like toe touches, 10 repetitions, 2 times, so 2 sets of it, 35, 2 times, so on, so forth, so on, so forth. And this is really just for if you're ever working in like a physical therapy clinic and you wanted, if you had someone who is fairly similar to this, you could mimic this and maybe you would get similar results, right? So that's really why they're reporting it. Make sense to everybody? I'm not going to go over all of it really quick. So the outcomes, what's really happening here? So 6-minute walk test. So in 6 minutes, like 1,200 feet to 1,470 feet, right? Cool? Good? So over the course of 12 weeks, we had an improvement there. All right, so that's good. The PPT score, so the physical performance test, that seemed to basically not really change. The FAM score seemed to go up a little bit. The self-report FAM score, that didn't really seem to change much. Now, here the dorsiflexion peak torque. If anybody like remembers like working with our ice kinetic dynamometer, that's what they used in order to do this. They used an older model, but 4.5 to 4.6 like Newton meters, if anybody like isn't aware, that's almost nothing. Like I think you could breathe on the machine and make that happen. Now, these other values, I actually tend to believe. Plantar flexion, does everybody know what this is? Plantar flexion? So like calf raises, that's essentially what that is. And dorsiflexion is bringing like the top of your foot closer to your tibialis anterior, right? So it does make sense that we're vastly weaker right there than the plantar flexion. But I mean, 4.5, 2.8, 4.6, 3.8, that is suspicious to me. And like, I don't think anybody who like reviewed this paper had ever actually used like an ice kinetic dynamometer before. Because if I was reviewing this, I'd be like, that's impossible. Like, does he not have feet? I don't know. It's oh, well, I mean, like it was published in 2012, and like, I mean, none of y'all were born yet, so it's Right, okay, cool. Average daily step count, that went up quite a bit. Hemoglobin A1C, that went down, like, I mean, that's not really, like, down enough much. He still has diabetes. Intermuscular adipose volume, that actually went up. Was anybody surprised by seeing that? Right, like, that's kind of crazy. For 12 weeks, he loses weight, and for some reason, the muscle, or the fat mass actually goes up. That's kind of bizarre, right? So fairly interesting right there. And they kind of explain like some of the reasons why that happened. So in some of your research, if you get crazy findings like that, you have to explain what you think it is, right? So that's, and I think they did a relatively good job. Now this one right here, muscle volume went down. So effectively this person went from not doing any type of training to actually doing some type of training. So what happened to this guy, the 76-year-old man? His fat mass went up, his muscle mass went down, and he lost weight. Right? Does anybody want to work out if that's what's going to happen? Right? Now, a lot of things actually did end up improving, but like whenever you're reading these things, pay attention to stuff like that, right? Because like, I mean, some things are stranger than fiction, right? So, and it's not just a Will Ferrell movie. Now here, I wanted to talk about the 6-minute walk test. So it was like 2 cones, walking in a hall, going back and forth 6 minutes, as many times as you could do it. In your dissection of an academic paper, there's something you're going to have to do, magnitude of results. So I'm doing that for you right here to understand what this means, because the patient presented in this case report was able to increase his 6-minute walk distance from 1,200 to 1,470. That's a 22% increase after a 12-week whatever. So I want you to think about this and put it in numbers that make sense to you. So 1,200 divided by 6, right? That's how you can get per minute, foot coverage. So for every 1 mile per hour, it's 88 feet. So then I divided that by 88 or whatever I did. So 2.27 miles per hour is what he averaged for that first 6 minutes. Now I'm sure there were oscillations, sometimes whenever he was going faster, sometimes whenever he was going slower, right? 2.27. Is this person walking fast? No. Normal, you normal people with normal length legs, can do much better than that. Now me, I actually walk around 2 miles an hour because, well, I've got nowhere to go. But then there was an improvement right here, 1470. Well, okay, I put I clearly just added another 0 to it because I don't know what I'm doing, right? Cool. And I'm not going to change that because I think that's funny. It would be better if he improved it that much. Now he's sprinting, right? So if we take that 0 off, it's 245 feet per minute. So that is 2.78 miles per hour, not even getting 3 miles per hour, right? So that's an increase of essentially half a mile per hour. So that's the math, how they get to say 22% increase. Y'all see this, right? And how they wrote about it, oh, it's kind of cool, he had an improvement. Over the course of 6 minutes, if you trained for 12 weeks and that's all the improvement that you got, what do y'all think about this now? Is it horrible? Yeah. Yeah, now I mean, we have to analyze this. Yes, Mike, totally. We have to analyze this with age. The average 76-year-old, I mean, the average person in the United States doesn't even make it to 76, right? So now these values are much faster than being dead, right? I agree with that. But that level of improvement right there isn't very much. And I just want you to see how someone can say a 22% improvement and that sounds like a lot, right? Right? I mean, 1/5 is 20%, give or take, right? So you did a fifth better and then just a hair more, right? That sounds good, but you have to analyze the math to really understand what's going on there, right? Because and they didn't talk about that, which, I mean, no one makes them talk about that because, I wasn't the reviewer on this paper. So some weird stuff going on here. I was going to read this a little bit more, where they're talking about like he lost muscle mass or lost muscle volume and gained like intramuscular adipose tissue in the calf. So they talked about some previous studies that have various things fairly similar to this. I'm not going to read all this to you. Like all of you can read the paper again if you want to. But whenever they were talking about it, here was a thing that a massive confounding variable in almost anything like this. So here, like the patient lost almost 6 kilograms during the 12 weeks of exercise intervention, but there was no targeted dietary intervention in the program. Do you think diet could have something to do with weight loss, right? So they didn't measure any of that. So it is unknown whether the patient altered his diet in any way in an effort to make healthy lifestyle changes. So whenever we're talking about confounding variables, is this a massive one? Maybe he lost the muscle mass because he stopped eating protein entirely, right? And like we do know that older individuals, like in PhysVex, I talk about this a little bit. There's something called like anabolic resistance. A certain amount of protein doesn't make like someone's muscle mass grow as much if you're a certain age. So you have to eat even more protein in order to get that. So older individual probably not eating enough and not eating enough protein in particular. And they didn't try to measure that, so they have no idea. So they can't explain what happened there. Right? So that's a glaring hole in there. If I was reviewing this, I would say, oh, you didn't try to measure their diet at all? Nope. Don't go to this journal. Like I'm not publishing this because it's noise, right? I can't draw causal relationships between anything. So there with that. And like here was a particular thing. And this is actually relatively common. And probably the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I'm a small guy. Like in this case report, strength increased despite a decrease in muscle volume. So if anybody ever tells you, including me, and I probably will tell you this in PhysVex, that the strength of a muscle is correlated to the size of the muscle. Maybe that's true, or there's a crap load of research that indicates otherwise. That it's like, maybe there's almost no relationship there. And this case report right here shows that muscle volume decreased, yet strength increased. So right there, size does not equal strength. Right? Like is that an interesting thing? So like here we have this in one person, and I can verify that there's numerous studies that this happens in. So I think that's kind of interesting.
And like he lost weight, so and getting into shape, probably a little bit more flexible. Movement of his arms or legs may have improved.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, so how we're talking about the strength in particular is with like the torque on like the plantar flexion. So no, you're entirely right, and they didn't report on this very well. So like whenever you use an isokinetic dynamometer, you're supposed to set like the range of motion through it. So if you actually gained range of motion, then yes, that could account for the entire increase in like the total torque. Because if you have a greater range of motion, you might get to a more optimal angle or something like that. So that's a really good point that we don't know about, right? But like I would assume that wherever he was losing weight from, and just like typical like male pattern like weight loss, it's normally in the midsection where they gain weight and lose it. So he probably isn't losing a bunch of weight from his ankles, you know? So, and now I mean like some people do, like ankles are a thing, right? Like we know of this, but like it's but like there, I'm assuming. I don't know. But right there, I think that's somewhat interesting. So what was the point of this whole study, right? It's essentially an N of 1 following one particular individual to see what happens whenever they undertake this. So the case report provides an example of weight-bearing exercise program that was successful in implementing a person with diabetes and all that type of stuff. Another reason why this stuff is important. If you're ever a physical therapist or you work anywhere, there's probably a case report about something that you're doing. And, gosh, what am I saying? I've dealt with so many clients that have an unrealistic idea of how much they will improve. So frequently people think that they're going to go from like I don't know, like look in a particular way to looking like a model or something. So that's right. Or going from benching 100 pounds to 300 pounds. Nope, the research indicates changes are very minimal. So you could show this to a client and just like what I did. It's like, oh no, you improved by like half a mile per hour on whatever your walk test was. That's actually good. Like other people have done that before. So this has given us information on like what's normal, more or less. Because likely you won't talk to other physical therapists or like, I don't know, like y'all might be antisocial and just not talk to anybody unless it's through Twitter or Instagram or whatever. So like that's why a lot of this is really important. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So it's given us like parameters on how much someone will or will not improve. Okay, so any questions about the case report? No? No? Okay, so like there's going to be an animal trial that we're going to read. Read that on Friday, quiz on from that on Monday, or read it over the weekend. I don't care when you read it. It's your life. So now going into this, and I think we can finish it. So just a reminder of the hierarchy of evidence. So here, like I know Eric really liked this, I met a random cohort of case-crossed animals who had opinions. So keep that in mind. Where we left off last time was talking about like we were kind of going up and we just got into cross-sectional studies. So this is where we're going with that. So really, the idea of a cross-sectional study versus a longitudinal study. A cross-sectional study, I acquire a bunch of data on people at one particular moment in time. So if we all did a survey and we did it now, that would be a cross-sectional study, right? So here, studies in which the presence or absence of disease or other health-related variables are determined in each member of the study population or whatever at one particular time. That's the biggest part. In contrast to longitudinal studies, which means you follow a set of people over time. So long period of time, right? Which frequently they aren't that long. Next thing I wanted you to know, sample size. So sample size or N size, both mean the same thing, so just the letter N. So the number of units or people within a particular study. One benefit of cross-sectional studies is frequently, since you only have to see them once, you can get a really high N size most of the time. And so that's why for those of you who are doing somewhat of a cross-sectional like descriptive or experimental study, that's why the N size I'm expecting out of you is higher than some of the other groups because you only have to see them once, right? So there's a thing with that. And I don't know, frequently they're subdivided by like different moderator type variables. So age group is one of them frequently, like gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth, high fitness, low fitness, amount of cigarettes smoked per day, all of that. Okay, here, problems with cross-sectional studies, and we're going to be talking about this like kind of at the end of class today if we get to it. They frequently, and like I want you to know this, if you ever read a cross-sectional study, they frequently don't have proper confounding variables. So a confounder is a variable that influences both the dependent and independent variable, causing a spurious association. So one thing here, it's just so easy for me to talk about, so I'm sorry that I'm going to keep on doing this. Like nutrition studies are probably the biggest ones who do a lot of cross-sectional stuff, and they have a lot of mistakes with it. That's why we always go back and forth with, are eggs good for you? Is milk good for you? Should I eat kale? Should I be plant-based? What does that even mean? Like so on and so forth, right? So something vegans almost always report like being healthier in just about everything, right? Like, in fact, vegans are the only subset of the American population that have a normal BMI between like, what is it, like 18.5 to 24.9. They're the only ones that on average have a normal BMI. Like lacto-vegetarians are actually slightly overweight, and so are semi-vegetarians, mean like whatever semi-vegetarian means. And like omnivorous people, which, you know, like if you don't really think about what you eat, that's most of us, all overweight. Here's a confounding variable, like whenever we look at stuff like that. Do you know what else vegans do more? They floss their teeth more frequently. On average, they eat 400 calories less per day than everybody else. They brush their teeth. They do yoga. They do stress management techniques. They meditate more. All of this stuff, right? Wait, say that again, Aubrielle.
Sounds like they have more time on their hands.
Oh, well, like, no, I don't know. Like, they probably don't, just because, I don't know. Like, how many of y'all feel like you're, like, so busy and all that type of stuff? Right, all of y'all? It's weird to me because, like, most of the time, I think most people just waste time. Like, most of the research indicates that you can't really focus hard for more than 4 hours a day. So if you focus for more than that, I think you're bullshitting me. So whatever. It's crap. Like, whenever I got my PhD, that's all I did. 4 hours a day. That was it. And worked for me because I knew I couldn't focus other times. So whatever. Or maybe my brain just doesn't work very well. But spurious correlations, whatever. Okay. Moving on from here. Case control study. I want you to be able to explain this to me. This picture, I think, explains it really well. So a lot of this has to do with health, and I think that's what we're all mostly interested in. So you have a group of interest, meaning people with, like, prostate cancer or something, right? Breast cancer, ovarian, like, who cares? Some flavor of cancer. At a particular moment in time, then you try to match a population, same, like, sex, same age, same whatever, same cigarettes smoked per day, and you take histories on them. Meaning you ask them, throughout your life, how much did you exercise? How many sports did you play? Like, how many, like, divorces have you had? How many, like, whatever. All the questions that you could possibly ask. And once you take those histories, so kind of a retrospective look at this, then you look at what is different in what they reported. Like, say, for example, like people who had, like, ovarian cancer had 0 children, but people who didn't had 10 children on average. Something like that. I'm making stuff up, right? Cool? So that could then be a thing. It's like, okay, so, like, if you are, like, a woman, having more children might protect you against having ovarian cancer, which I think is actually a true association, but don't take my word on that, because I haven't read that in a while. But that overall is what a case control study is. So here, a couple of issues with it. So I want you to know about these biases. So case control studies, very prone to bias. So selection bias, I think this is kind of clear. If we have a particular disease of interest, we're selecting people who have that disease, right? So that's more or less what selection bias is. So is a distortion in a measure of association due to a sample selection that does not accurately reflect the target population. So if we're looking at some type of relatively obscure cancer, like, I don't know, I can't think of one. It's getting late in the day for me. Not everybody has that particular flavor of cancer, so it might not be translatable to the entire population as a whole, right? So recall bias, this one is a really big one. Probably the biggest one I want you to know about for issues with case control studies. It's an error caused by differences in the accuracy or completeness of recollections retrieved by study participants regarding events or experiences from the past. How accurately do you think anybody really remembers how many cigarettes they had per day, like 5 years ago? Right? I mean, does anybody really remember what, like, did any of y'all eat breakfast? I mean, you might not. Like, intermittent fasting is a pretty big fad now, so. Right? No one eats breakfast? Okay, like some people? Right? Okay, cool. Like, do y'all know how hard it is if y'all don't participate? I mean, like, I'm cool with it, but it's, y'all are just like my mother, never listening to me. Cool.
Like, she watches your video?
Mm-hmm. No, like, as long as we're at a distance, she's okay, right? As long as we don't talk, we're good. Like, does anybody remember what you had for breakfast? Not yesterday, last Tuesday, the Tuesday before that. No? No? So if you can't recall something like that, why would I ask you anything? Right? Yeah, that's like that. That's also why witness accounts don't stand up in criminal court, right? And they shouldn't. right? Because I don't think anyone remembers anything, right? I barely remember stuff. Like, what's my name again? Or what's my age again? A Blink-182 thing? Okay. Here, next thing, moving on to cohort studies. So, a clinical research study in which people who presently have a certain condition or receive a particular treatment are followed over time and compared with another group of people who are not affected. So a cohort study, say, well, this is very similar to a longitudinal study. Like, juxtapose that with a cross-sectional study. Like, say I make all of y'all do push-ups, and I make all of y'all not do push-ups, and I follow you over a period of time. This is the push-up cohort, this is the not push-up cohort. And then, like, I measure stuff on you, like, later on in your life, right? Like, huh? Yes, only bicep curls over there, right? Right, which actually, like, do you know, like, bicep thickness actually predicts, like, a lot of crap? It's crazy. It's yeah, it's no, like your bicep thickness. Get this, it predicts who you vote for. But only no, like it does. But only if I know what your salary is. Right? Yeah, like I'm not going to talk about it at all. But like it's because I don't know, like politics always bothers people. I guess it's I don't know. Like but moving on. So here, two different things. I don't think y'all have these two. So prospective cohort study and retrospective cohort study. So here, first one, prospective, meaning going forward, is a longitudinal cohort study that follows over time a group of similar individuals, cohorts who differ with respect to certain factors under study to determine how these factors affect rates of a certain outcome, right? So a retrospective cohort study, kind of going backwards on this, are a type of observational research in which the investigator looks back in time at archived or self-report data to examine whether the risks of disease was different between exposed and non-exposed patients. So, here, after y'all write this stuff down, I'll talk. So retrospective cohort, that sounds a lot like a case control to everybody, right? Sounds a lot like it to me. Now, there's a particular difference in it. Oh, I'm going to here. This one. Since a retrospective cohort and a case control are somewhat different, this is confusing, and I'm not even sure I'm teaching this very well. So, like, I'm not going to ask you this on a test because I don't think it's really relevant for what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So that's, but also I could be wrong. So a retrospective cohort studies try to compare the risk of developing a disease to some already known exposure factors. So here, they don't necessarily have cancer in that case, but a case control study will try to determine the possible exposure factors after a known disease incidence. So case control, they already have the disease. Retrospective cohort, they might not have the disease. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so there with that. Some advantages and disadvantages of the cohort stuff. So here are some of these. One of the biggest ones that I wrote right here for prospective or longitudinal going forward cohort studies is attrition. Truthfully, I don't know. One advantage, clarity of temporal sequence, meaning like you know the timing of occurrence of different things. Here, read through this. Like I need to go a little bit faster. Here, randomized control trials. This is essentially like the gold standard for determining like causality or seeing how things are related to each other. A couple of things that I really want you to know with it. So you have some study participants. They're randomized to a given treatment. So either treatment A or treatment B. If we wanted to make it a little bit better, one of the treatments would be placebo. So a randomized placebo control trial. Then there's frequently a follow-up. To make it better, there's something called a washout period. So I want you to know what a washout period is. So in a randomized control trial, a washout period is after a given treatment, you let them just do free living, just live how they were before, then you give them the other treatment. We good with this? So kind of in a way, I want you to think about how to make a randomized control trial better. These are really expensive to do, so not a lot of people do it. Over here on the right side, patients, you randomize them to treatment group or control group. Then you do a follow-up and you compare the results. That's a good randomized control trial. Now, we can make this better by adding a placebo to it. So instead of a control group, we could give them a substance and say, oh, this is supposed to do something good, right? So that's a placebo, effectively. Now, to make that even better from adding placebo, we would have a washout period and then have treatment, then they would do the other treatment. Is everyone good with this? Right? Fairly straightforward? All right, cool. How's this going so slow? Here, just a couple of things I wanted you to know. I think everyone knows what a control group is. Double-blind and single-blind methods. Hopefully everyone knows what this is. Single-blind just means that if I'm the researcher and you're a participant in it, you don't know which group you're in. A double-blind method would be where I don't know and you don't know, essentially, right? So is that good? Everyone good with that? Okay. So crossover studies, that's effectively the washout thing that we were talking about prior. Okay, so moving on. RCTs here, they're very comparative. They minimize bias, minimizes confounds, disadvantages, logistics, applicability, and ethical limitations. Effectively, they're just hard to do. That's more or less what that is. Systematic review. These we're going to be reading these in here. This is really just like a textbook chapter, kind of reviewing a given topic. Pretty wonderful to actually look at. So not going to talk about that too much. Meta-analysis. These go one step beyond the systematic review, where a systematic review really, I don't know, here's how I think about it. A systematic review is only words. A meta-analysis is words and numbers. So a meta-analysis, they essentially do statistics on statistics from other studies. That's essentially what's going on there. There's a lot of really, I don't know, complex statistical methods to do this. But this is where we get a bunch of different studies and we can draw conclusions from numerous studies. They're overall, from all of these, I think systematic reviews are the easiest to read, but meta-analyses are probably some of the most important. So really, overall, research is hard, and even if someone does a meta-analysis, I'm going to see how much of this I can actually get through. So 4 minutes, I think I can do this. Okay. So here, let's take something like this. And if you've had other classes with me, I've done this before, but it's particularly cool because has anyone seen the Game Changers documentary? No? It's on Netflix. It's about being a vegan. Right? Right? It's a pretty cool documentary. And they cited something that I always cite in classes, and I think this is awesome. So here, this unprocessed red and processed meats and risk of coronary artery disease and type 2 diabetes, all sorts of stuff. Right? So here, this is like a meta-analysis over does red meat cause heart disease and stuff? Right? Overall, does everybody think red meat causes heart disease? Well, you should if you ever talk to anybody, right? You should. That's what the media says. That's what everyone says, right? Is everyone good with that? Right? Okay. Well, disease and overabundance. I'm not sure. Okay. So here, these sinus studies looked at males and females. If we look at that study in this meta-analysis, so these forest plots, I picked these studies out of there to actually look at and see what they're saying. So here, meat intake and immortality is what I almost said. So a prospective study of over 500,000 people. Over 500,000 people, that's a bunch of people, right? So we're going to get good averages from this. So the conclusions in this paper that were cited in that meta-analysis, red and processed meat intakes were associated with modest increases in total mortality, cancer mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality. So here, yes, they are related to increased risk of death. So what was cool, at like in the Game Changers documentary, I took a screenshot of me watching it on my computer at 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 40 seconds into the movie. Like the guy who put it together, James Wilkes, he's actually a really smart guy. This is what he says: with overwhelming scientific evidence connecting animal foods to the most commonly death diseases, all that type of stuff. So he cites this study that I cite in all of my classes that I ever get to talk about it, and I thought it was hilarious, right? Because I know so much about this study. And here, let's look at the study really quick. So, shoot, I have a little bit of time. 2 minutes? Okay, like I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I possibly can. Okay, so they split people into quintiles. So quintile 1, lowest red meat consumption. Quintile 5, highest red meat consumption. Right, everyone good with that? Okay, so all mortality, this is men. So right there, 6,000 to 13,000. Right, so more dead over here. Everyone good with that? Right, right here, cardiovascular mortality, almost 2,000 to almost 4,000. More dead. So far, so good. I'm believing their conclusions. Right here, mortality from injuries and sudden deaths. Car accidents is what this was. 184 to 343. Kind of interesting, right? So eating red meat makes you get in more car accidents. I believe it. So here, that is a 107% increase. This one with cancer mortality, 108% increase, 98%, and 86% increase. So there's reason to believe that it's actually related to all these other ones, but there's an 86% increase in death from car accidents from eating more red meat. Is that interesting to anybody? Right, yeah, meat coma, which actually meat doesn't do that because protein stimulates glucagon to make you awake, but whatever. And then 134% increase. So the highest one, this one is all other deaths. So what are all these other deaths that aren't cancer, heart disease, or like car accidents? Oh yeah, suicide, old age. So meat makes that worse, right? Okay, here, I'll talk about what happened to the women next time because I'm clearly out of time. All right, so see y'all on Monday, unless you're in group 4 through 7.